Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Ontario Provincial Digital Teach-In, mandating police and policing in schools through Bill 33, Provincial Landscape and Terrains. We are going to be getting started. And again, this Provincial Digital Teach-In is hosted by Policing Free Schools and the Provincial Campaign for a Policing Free Schools Ontario. Before moving forward, I would like to acknowledge that I am and Policing Free Schools as well is located on stolen Indigenous land across Turtle Island, and recognize that these lands have been and continue to be inhabited by many nations of Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. While we're gathering from multiple Indigenous lands and connecting through this virtual space, I'd like to acknowledge where Policing Free Schools is based and myself as well. And that is based out of the original lands called Toronto, and acknowledge the original peoples of these lands, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples who also called these lands home. I want to also acknowledge the stolen Indigenous lands where many of you may be calling in from today across what is currently called today Ontario, Canada, a traditional territory to many Indigenous nations and peoples. Acknowledging as well those who came here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic enslavement trade. And so we honor and pay tribute to ancestors of African origin and descent. With this data, it's extremely necessary. It's imperative to move beyond acknowledgement. It's not just, a checkbox to be marked off. It is, in fact, Indigenous, Black, Afro-Indigenous, Black, African diasporic, including across intersecting identities, including those who are disabled, neurodivergent, two-spirited, LGBTQIA+, from Black, Afro-Indigenous, and Indigenous communities who are most negatively impacted by policing and carceral logics, cultural practices, and systems across so-called Ontario, across so-called Canada, and globally. And they continue to be systematically harmed and denied their humanity. And it's both our individual and collective responsibilities to dismantle these systems. And actually, currently, there are multiple bills across the country, including right here in Ontario, that are undermining Indigenous self-governance and self-determination, such as Bill 5. So for folks out there, follow 8th Fire Rising on Instagram and check out their website, 8thfirerising.ca, and get involved any way that you can. Be in solidarity. They are working alongside many other Indigenous peoples against Bill 5 and many other bills. And so thank you again for joining us this evening for the Ontario Provincial Digital Teach-In, where you will be learning about Bill 33. We are going to be delving into that proposed legislation, which seeks to mandate police and policing in schools across the province in the public education system. We're going to be looking at how it came to be, also how it changes the particular landscape, both provincially and the local terrains for organizing and advocacy. You'll also be learning about ways to get involved, calls to action, upcoming back to school teach-ins, and initiatives that center political education, capacity building, and providing support and care to young people, their families, and communities, mitigating and reducing harm. And of course, the co-creation of respite spaces away from policing. After the teach-in, we will be holding space for a community knowledge exchange and questions. Although the teach-in portion is being recorded, as mentioned previously, the community exchange will not be. It's also important for me to mention at this time that this teach-in shows a particular snapshot of time and space, both historical and contemporary, in relation to police and policing in schools and the proposed Provincial Bill 33. It is a snapshot as the present state of police and policing in schools, including in Ontario, continues to shift, including beyond this teach-in. And so for a brief introduction, my name is Andrea Vásquez Jiménez, gender pronoun she, her, ella. I'm director and principal consultant at Policing Free Schools. I'm a community organizer, community educator for over a decade. I'm also an electoral political organizer. I was also a lead organizer for the removal of the Police in School program at the Toronto District School Board, namely the School Resource Officer program, through a community-led and collaborative process when I was with the previous organization where I was co-director, and since then have supported multiple additional educational spaces to do the same. I would also like to take this time to briefly introduce Alexis Dawson, who is also joining us for today's Provincial Digital Teach-In. Alexis Dawson is a community member, an anti-racism educator, public education advocate, equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant, and was a democratically elected Ontario-based school board trustee, whose board has actually been recently placed under supervision and trustees stripped of their powers. In 2019, Alexis received the City of Toronto's Access, Equity, and Human Rights William P. Hubbard Race Relations Award for her work on equity and education, and as a community organizer in Toronto's Oakwood Vaughan neighborhood. Also, fun fact, in 2022, Alexis, when she was a school trustee candidate, had actually signed onto our Policing Free Schools Toronto pledge. Alexis will also be introducing herself in more detail when they speak. So a little bit about Policing Free Schools. Policing Free Schools is a community-based organization, primarily grassroots. We're dedicated to catalyzing systemic changes, doing paradigm shifts away from punitive, carceral educational spaces, and moving towards liberatory, healing-centered, and policing-free educational spaces. Policing Free Schools, we also help our partners strategize, organize, analyze, and mobilize. And of course, political education teach-ins are super important for us, building up education and awareness around these issues, and also ultimately push for policy and legislative changes. We also convened the National Campaign for a Policing Free Schools Canada, as well as an organizational lead for the Provincial Campaign for a Policing Free Schools Ontario. And of course, this being a systemic issue, we work on these issues alongside both national and international partners across so-called Canada, the US, and the UK. And so for a roadmap today, I'm going to be briefly delving into two particular foundational and brief fundamentals that we have at Policing Free Schools, which are also very much important to keep in mind throughout the teach-in. We are then going to be looking at a very brief Ontario provincial landscape and terrains in relation to police and policing in schools. We're going to be delving then into recent and relevant historical context, really giving us an overview and understanding of what happened, particularly within the last year that actually has led up to Bill 33, and why this legislation is actually not surprising whatsoever. We're going to delve into the Ontario-based Bill 33, very much line by line. We're going to be looking at how this proposed legislation changes landscape and terrains for organizing and advocacy. And then we're going to be jumping into our back to school initiatives at the Provincial Campaign for Policing Free Schools Ontario, calls to action, how to support and get involved. And then we are going to be jumping into the community knowledge exchange. And so for fundamentals of policing free schools, we need for it to be clear, and I want to make myself clear, as so many of us may be aware of, that when we look at the data and research relating to police and school programs and policing in schools, there is no evidence, absolutely no evidence to support the notion that police and school programs and policing in schools make educational spaces safer. There is, however, ample evidence of the detrimental impacts of police and school programs and policing on students. Young people, again, that are particularly impacted are Black, African diasporic, Indigenous, racialized, two-spirited, LGBTQIA+, disabled, neurodivergent, students with precarious immigration status, including those with undocumented status and across intersecting identities. There are definitely, as well, what we have been seeing in the last few years, heightened levels of policing outside of police and school programs, most recently impacting as well Palestinian, Muslim, and Arab students, and of course, young people also in solidarity with Palestine. There are detrimental impacts, and that includes, of course, negative impacts on young people's well-being and educational outcomes. And the reality is that equitable access to education is a human right. And again, structures of police and policing impede this access? What we know is that thriving and healthy communities, including educational spaces, which in and of themselves are safe, have more supports and resources, not more policing. We know what actually supports the conditions for optimal learning and working spaces in schools, and that's because students' learning conditions are workers' working conditions. This too is a labor and a union issue, right? What research shows is that smaller classroom sizes, ample supports and resources, including but not limited to teachers, education workers, educational assistants, support staff, mental health supports, a range of professional support services personnel, wraparound services, right? We're talking about before and after school programming, school food, school nutrition programs, clean water, clean air, right? Transportation, along with, of course, addressing root causes, addressing social and structural determinants of health and equity is what actually creates healthy educational spaces, which in and of themselves are safe and co-creates the conditions for students' well-being and academic excellence and workers' well-being simultaneously. Police-free schools is a necessary first step towards policing free schools, as policing and carceral measures show up in multiple ways within schooling and educational spaces beyond police presence, whether it be exclusions, whether it be timeouts, whether it be seclusion and restraint, whether it be corporal punishment, which is actually still legal, despite it being a call to action within the Truth and Reconciliation, right? So there's many ways that it shows up, policing carcerality within our schooling spaces beyond police presence. Also for a collective campaign definition, so what is it that we exactly mean by when we say police and policing free schools, right? So at Policing Free Schools, we are in alignment with our US-based national campaign partners, the Advancement Project and the Alliance for Educational Justice campaign definition, and it has been extended to policing free schools. And that is a dismantling school policing infrastructure, culture, and practice, ending school militarization and surveillance, and building a new liberatory education system. So again, it's not just about what are we dismantling, what are we breaking down, but what is it that we're co-creating? And this connects it to that it's not just about stopping the passage of Bill 33, but rather what is it that we are going to be looking to build? And one of the last pieces for us that I'm going to be delving into before moving on is fundamental again to policing free schools, and that is no replication of harm, right? And replication of harm are done through reformist reforms, right? So we know that equity-driven, anti-oppressive, anti-racist, life-affirming, liberatory, and healing-centered educational spaces, wherever they may be, are not possible with policing and carceral measures, right? And so how do we move actually towards policing free schools? And that's through non-reformist reforms, right? So Critical Resistance, a US-based organization, has taught us that reformist reforms are those that continue or expand the reach of policing and abolitionist steps, which are non-reformist reforms, work to chip away and reduce its overall impact. It's exponentially important to mention that police presence in any school programming and or school-related activity and or police and school program, regardless of the name it goes by, such as the school resource officer program or otherwise, perpetuates detrimental impacts of police and policing in schools, as this is a systemic issue and Ontario is not exempt, right? The harmful impacts also continue to remain intact if reformist reforms or revisionist approaches are made to the school resource officer program or to any form of policing in schools, right? Whether that is, a renaming, a rebranding, a revising, an updating, a quote unquote reimagining, right? Whether it's changes to its composition, whether it be increase in diversifying police so that they're representative in schools, right? Whether it's less number of police, whether it be police in one, some, or all schools, right? Whether it is police not being stationed in schools or police having reduced hours on site at schools, whether there are more specific roles and responsibilities, or whether it's being coupled up with an educator in schools, whether there are additional trainings, changes to police uniforms, smaller guns, among many other revisions or reforms. Again, the harm will persist. And we are also adamant on not pushing, for quote unquote alternatives to police and policing in schools, as the act, the verb of policing by other means will continue to cause harm who may be doing it, right? And what is necessary are non-policing strategies and measures, including addressing root issues, right? Ensuring that those folks who do enter educational spaces are not only representative of communities that they're serving, but also hold a particular politic and track record that is not grounded in punitive measures and carceral measures, right? And so here it's just another example. This is more particularly in regards to post-secondary spaces, but also may possibly happen within K-12 spaces. So now we're going to be jumping into a brief 101 around the Ontario provincial landscape and terrains of police and policing in schools. It's important for everyone to be aware of across the province to know that although the School Resource Officer Program may be the most popularly known name of a police and school program in Ontario, this is literally just one of the multiple known names of police and school programs. This is a graphic, but there's actually, within the last few years, there's actually many more other rebranded names of police in school programs. I always tend to say, so that folks may understand, is that all SRO programs are police and school programs, but not all police and school programs are SRO programs. And right here in Ontario, aside from the SRO program, there's been boards who have had them under the School Engagement Team Officer Support Program. There's been Police Liaison Officer program. There has also been, of course, within elementary school ages, the Values Influences Peers. And more recently, there's been, for instance, in Barrie, they came out with the Inside Out program, right? They are police and school programs, right? And so again, these are just some examples of the names that programs go by across all education levels. And of course, there are many more. So a briefing on who exactly funds police and policing in schools in Ontario. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about funding, right? So based on where you are situated and what it's currently called Ontario, in the local context, funding for police and school programs are either being paid through the funds of the local police, essentially through their police budget that comes through the municipality, or can be seen as through the municipality kind of as a top up, right? It can be paid through your school board. There are school boards that are possibly fully covering. This could either also be fully covered by one of these entities or maybe covered in different arrangements for shared costs by more than one of these, including the provincial government. Remember, based on where you are locally situated, this may look different, just as the local terrain looks different based on where you are. So in the provincial context of Ontario, the provincial government has also been funding police and schools. For instance, through, oops, came through, pardon me. For instance, through the Ministry of Solicitor General, they have been funding them, right? They have been funding them through currently the Community Safety and Policing Grant, right? So through ongoing research, have been able to find out that this has both been historically done, the funding of police and school programs and policing in schools historically been done under the Liberal government and also now under the current Doug Ford administration, right? Millions of dollars have been going through, funneled into police and schools through the Ministry of Solicitor General, as mentioned, right? And so this is the current reality of this government who chooses to chronically underfund education along with social service sectors, meanwhile siphoning funds out of communities and into expanding into the carceral system, correctional facilities, additional bills that, that seek to criminalize, right? It's about padding police budgets and facilitating the aid of tiered and layered policing into everyday spaces and practices. And with that said, unfortunately, there isn't a lot of transparency, and it is difficult when researching through public materials as to how much exactly the Ontario government has been siphoning funds into police and schools under this administration and across many years. This is a foundational reason why a Freedom of Information request has been previously submitted, and we are waiting on the release of those documents. And this is very much a provincial jurisdiction issue, right? We already have a provincial model for a local police and school board protocol, where the government was actually petitioned last year to mandate to amend this provincial model and actually mandate and give the directive to remove all forms of police and school programs as a first and necessary step. Also, looking at uprooting policing and carceral measures outside of police presence, including Banala and Matua was mentioned previously, such as seclusion, restraint, exclusions, punitive disciplinary practices, among many others. And so for a provincial campaign for policing free schools, Ontario, we knew that one by one local campaign wins are not sustainable, right? A provincial campaign was necessary for incremental wins at the provincial level towards the larger goal of seeing a policing free schools Ontario. And of course, preventative measures to a provincial mandate of police and school programs. Preventative measures is absolutely important. We've seen that within the last few years, whether it be right here in so-called Canada, most recently in Victoria, British Columbia, the government there fired trustees that were committed to maintaining the removal of their police and school program. In Ontario, recently in December, the motion 145, which had called on the Ministry of Education to encourage and support policing in schools. A few years ago, Regina, Saskatchewan, they have a police teacher-led high school called the Scott Police Academy, right? It's a partnership between Regina Public Schools and Regina Police Service. And even our international partners have seen these trends as well, right? For instance, our partners in Texas have seen that, in the state of Texas, they have already mandated police in schools. We saw, in California, there was a failed attempt at mandating police in schools. And in Oklahoma, we saw police replacing teachers due to short staff shortage, right? And so it's extremely important that we had a provincial campaign for multiple years now to ensure that we can move forward. And this isn't a new issue. The reason why this bill is also particularly increasingly significant that it is in Ontario is precisely because it is also an assault on community and youth organizing, right? For years, people and organizers have been pushing for the removal of police presence from educational spaces, even prior to the inception of policing free schools, even prior to me being engaged in this struggle from over a decade ago, right? And just over the last decade, Ontario has had the most locally based wins. The majority of those wins have been community-led local campaign wins, including many of them led by young people. And what is really important is to recognize that the first historical precedent for the removal of police in school program actually took place in 2017. It was at the Toronto District School Board through a concerted effort. This had happened in 2017 after almost a decade of police stationed in Toronto schools since 2008, with initial mobilizing and organizing against the police in school program, namely the SRO program, being carried out by community members, educators, students, parents, and caregivers, including Jane Finch Action Against Poverty, JFAP, also the No Cops Neighborhood Organized Coalition Opposed to Police in Schools, and Northern Secondary School students were there from the get-go, right? The renewed concerted effort by an organization that I was previously with, LAN, also folks from Education Not Incarceration, BLM Toronto, Surge Toronto, Educators for Peace and Justice, of course, JFAP, and many others. This was a concerted effort. We've seen locally based community-led wins also in Peel Region. We saw Hamilton Wentworth District School Board was also youth-led by Hamilton Students for Justice, formerly known as Hamilton Wentworth District School Board Kids Need Help Coalition. Our Ottawa-based partners, the Silu Collective, fought for their win at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, also youth-led. We saw Waterloo Region District School Board, again, youth-led in Waterloo Region, right? By Students for Inclusive School, also the Black Billions Advisory Committee, and multiple other wins by young people, including in Guelph by Black Lives Matter Guelph. and many other wins, right? We saw wins in Simcoe County, right? Parents that were coming out speaking against it, including Reimagine Public Safety Barry, as well as Parents Against Racism Simcoe. And with all of these wins, I want to be deliberate when drawing a distinction that despite these wins, policing in schools has actually continued, not necessarily under the guise of a police in school program, but under many other names and shows up differently. For instance, still get a lot of phone calls from young people, educators, and caregivers. Um, for example, at the Toronto District School Board, particularly in Jane and Finch, many individual administrators are still inviting police on an individual basis, right? Police are in there, playing basketball, foosball, giving bike giveaways, doing helmet fits, and so forth, right? So again, despite these wins in many spaces, not just in Toronto, that I've seen where police are still entering those spaces despite systems making decisions. And so why do we actually still have police and school programs across the province, right? The following day after the initial historical removal of the police and school program, the SRO program at TDSB in 2017, at a press conference, when I was with another organization, I had personally called on the Liberal Minister of Education at the press conference to step in and remove police from all Ontario schools. The Minister of Education of that time, under the Liberals, painted the issue as a local one. Truth is that there was a lack of political will. Instead of addressing this systemic issue and reducing harm, they continue to perpetuate it. And so now I'm going to be looking over the recent and relevant historical context. So last year in June of 2024, before the legislature abruptly closed for the summer, now former NDP MPP Jill Andrew tabled two of our Policing Free Schools petitions at the legislature. What was tabled was two separate yet interconnected petitions. The first one being titled Mandate the Removal of Police in School Programs and Policing in School Programs from Educational Spaces. That was not only just K-12, but also looking at post-secondary. And the second petition titled Mandate the Removal of Policing, Carceral, and Punitive Approaches from Educational Spaces in Ontario. Before we have a listen, be mindful that the petitions weren't able to be read out word by word due to changes enacted by the Ford government, and you may be noticing some heckling.
Not police ourselves out of violence, and that also includes in our school spaces. So I'm honored to stand here and present this petition. It's a petition calling for the removal of police in schools programs across Ontario. The petition has been signed by approximately 15 ridings in this legislature, and it's calling for us to address the root causes of violence and to address the mental health crisis in our schools and the teacher and education worker shortage in our schools, as opposed to militarizing our schools, which, as we know, disproportionately impacts BIPOC students in our Ontario schools. We cannot police ourselves out of violence, and that includes our schools. So I'm going to affix my signature on this petition that's calling for us to make more investments in teachers, education workers, and mental health supports for our kids instead of militarizing our schools. They're calling for a removal of police in school programs across Ontario. I absolutely support this petition. I'm affixing my signature, and I will hand it over to Farhan for tabling. Thank you, Farhan.
Okay, so that was Jill Andrew when they were tabling the petition. And so that was in June of last year, June 2024. 6 months later, on December the 3rd, motion 145 was put forward by PC MPP Jess Dixon. Policing Free Schools and our provincial campaign and our partners knew it was important to push back, even though it was a private member's public motion, not a bill at that time. And although it was more of an opinion of the House, it was still important for us to still push back at that time due to multiple reasons, right? Including the widespread implications of the motion, of course, across local spaces in Ontario, the entirety of the province, both nationally and beyond. Of course, realizing that it is a pathway towards mandating police and school programs across the province, which we are seeing now with the introduction of proposed legislation, Bill 33, and very much the underpinning ideology connected to the multiple ways that the Ontario government expands and funnels funds into police, policing, and carceral systems, while again chronically underfunding communities, including schooling and educational spaces. And of course, the vast amount of misinformation and disinformation being spread by PC MPPs, right? And so, there was the education critic, the Ontario New Democratic Party MPP Pasma and MPP Andrew that spoke out in opposition. There was a recorded vote on the motion the following day on December 4th. And of course, the motion did pass due to a PC majority government, and the vote was carried. The Ontario New Democratic Party completely and fully opposed the motion. The Ontario Green Party fully opposed the motion. Independent Sarah Jama also opposed the motion. And those that were actually divided on a vote, whereas previously they would have been in support of police and schools fully, was the Ontario Liberal Party. And that's because of organizing and placing pressure on them through Provincial Campaign that they were even divided on the vote. And of course, PCs voted in favor. So although right before going into the Ontario based Bill 33, and although today's focus is on Ontario and Bill 33, I do have to briefly speak to what has happened and is happening actually in British Columbia, as multiple and particular parts of this Ontario proposed legislation is 100% inspired completely by what has happened there recently as well. And so it's important for me to make mention of this, not only because it is part of the story that gave way to Bill 33, but also demonstration that what happens in other spaces, impacts us and each other, right? Likewise, this bill will have not only local and provincial implications, but as well as nationally and beyond, showing yet again our struggles are interconnected. And so very briefly, in British Columbia, May 2023, a school district 61, the Greater Victoria School District, came to the decision to end their school police liaison officer program. After conducting over 2.5 years of research, the Greater Victoria School District reaffirmed their decision of the removal of the school police liaison officer program, despite calls to reinstate. Last year in September of 2024, the Minister of Education at that time and Childcare, Rashna Singh, issued an administrative directive for an updated student safety plan to be submitted by the Board of Trustees, and all school boards in the province of BC have to submit those, right? And so the plan had a submission date to the minister by November of that year, last year, and the revised safety plan was not accepted. On December the 6th, under the current education minister in BC, Lisa Bear, had threatened to fire the elected school board of Greater Victoria School District if they do not provide a revised quote unquote safety plan, right? And this was done so without directly stating that the safety plan must include the reintroduction of the school police liaison officer program and of policing in schools, attempting to really intimidate and force the board in BC to reinstate, making an example of them, because they were also at that time not the only school board who had removed a police in school program in BC, right? But they're really looking at making an example of them again, to force the board to reinstate a school police liaison officer program without being seen to do so. And the minister earlier this year, actually in January, fired the school board, placed them under supervision, despite multiple safety plans being provided. Again, the safety plans were not accepted. This wasn't surprising either. And despite bringing to their awareness that those who were reviewing the safety plans and the person sent to the board previous to being placed under supervision to quote unquote support the creation of a safety plan, actually profit off of the expansion of policing in schools in multiple ways, had actually released an executive summary of a report through Policing Free School at the end of last year. So what we're seeing is that the BC government effectively mandated policing in schools and policing school programs, not through legislation, but solely through fear and intimidation tactics. And the government is now being sued, right? And so connecting us back to Ontario Bill 33, as we're going to be, delving into it and unpacking it, essentially in Ontario, they are choosing to legislate what BC government has already done without legislation, taking it even a step further. So now let's talk about and delve into Bill 33, which is the current Ontario Minister of Education, Paul Calandra, introduced it this past May 29th. And Bill 33 is also referred to, as folks may already be aware of, as the quote unquote Supporting Children and Students Act 2025. It's also known under an act to amend various acts in relation to child, youth, and family services, education in colleges and universities. The unpacking of Bill 33 will be focused today on the aspects of the proposed legislation that is directly related to education and specifically to the K-12 public education system. And so ahead of that, I want to mention in advance of today, at this moment, that I have already confirmed through the New Democratic Party of Ontario education critic Chandra Pasma's office that the Ontario NDP will be opposing Bill 33. They have reaffirmed their support. Also recently confirmed that the Ontario Green Party, through their director of the leader's office, that they too will be opposing Bill 33. Both the ONDP official position and the Green Party will be pushing for properly funded, supported, and resourced schools, not policing in schools. I am, though, however, still waiting on communication from the Ontario Liberal Party as to whether, as a full party and caucus, if they will be opposing Bill 33. With that said, let's get into it. Bill 33 is a proposed sweeping, wide-reaching legislation, and specifically in relation to K-12, kindergarten to grade 12 spaces, it expands the minister's authority over schools, making it easier to take over schools, school boards, to both investigate and place them under supervision, essentially firing trustees and stripping them of their powers. This is most definitely this bill is part of a broader effort to undermine public education in Ontario, right? Meanwhile, again, we're continuously seeing chronically underfunding, the choosing of underfunding education, right? This bill means more money for policing and carceral measures and less for schools, students, and educators, right? And so this bill, contrary to its title, actually has nothing to do with supporting students, and has everything to do with decimating public education and widening a pathway to consolidation and privatization, right? They're concentrating government power by way of a power grab. And most significantly, in regards to today's focus of police and policing in schools, Bill 33 is concentrating police power over elected school board trustees and is normalizing police and policing as a fundamental feature of schooling spaces across the province. And this proposal is a distraction from what the real issue is: a chronically underfunded public education system, 6.3 billion since 2018, and a government that has a track record, again, of siphoning funds out of public education and community-based services and support systems and plummeting them into punitive, criminalizing, and carceral measures and systems. This will be greatly noticed through how the legislation is worded and simultaneously what is absent from the legislation, which we will be looking over shortly, line by line. Meanwhile, before delving into the specific wording of the legislation, I do find it important for us to look at the narrative that is being built around Bill 33. So what you're seeing is the headline part of the statement that accompanied the announcement of the bill. So it's important to recognize how the provincial government, through their communications on this bill, including through the Ontario Newsroom, has been framing the Supporting Children and Students Act, right? as it is part of a process to manufacture consent and consensus of the wider public and control the narrative. And the narrative, in particular, surrounding Bill 33 can be noticed, again, through the title and subtitle that the government has released. Non-surprisingly, really attempting to conflate this Bill 33, including its new measures of police and policing in schools, including police in school programs, right? Again, whether it be police presence in any school property, police in any school programming and or school-related activity, or any type of police in school program, SRO program or otherwise, is being put under the guise of quote unquote helping protect children and youth, promoting student success, right? This part that you're now seeing is also part of the announcement. And we here are seeing how they are attempting to frame the understanding of police and policing in schools with the notion of increased safety, increasing well-being, increasing academic and personal achievement, promoting student success, enhancing youth safety, student safety, and so forth. And so now what we're looking at, which is still the continuation of the announcement, are these statements. One of them by the Solicitor General and one of them by the President of the Police Association of Ontario. And again, these narratives, the framing of the issue that they are putting forward are not new whatsoever, right? For these framings and narratives, they are looking to conflate police in school programs and policing in schools with relationship building and the notion of fostering of trust, safety, and mentorship, or stronger relationships between students, educators, and law enforcement, right? And they're framing it as a means to, conflating it as if that means creating secure learning environments, as they mentioned, right? That they're stating that would promote trust between communities, right? And as a means to, building stronger and safer communities. That's actually not the case. And this is indeed a public relations. This is a public relations machine. This is complete propaganda that's within this bill. It's a propaganda machine for police, despite harms that it will cause and exacerbate, right? Meanwhile, again, the harms of school-based policing will be amplified, will be exacerbated, and the school-prison nexus, the collusion of systems, will be entrenched across the province. And in actuality, there's already Canadian-based research, including Ontario-based research, that debunks this whole notion, this narrative of relationship building, and so forth, right? For instance, a couple of examples. Toronto, Ontario-based Geeta Rao-Madan, community organizer and educator with Education Not Incarceration, from their MA thesis from the University of Toronto, they had authored a publication, their thesis, Policing in Toronto Schools, Racing the Conversation, and had also authored, quote unquote, I'm Just a Friend Now, Community Policing in Toronto Schools. Another example, based in Edmonton, Alberta, to mention a couple, is based off of Professor Alexander Da Costa, who had authored Relationship Building and the Normalization of Police in Schools, the Emergence of School Resource Officer Programs in Canada. So again, these narratives, they've been tried before, they've already been completely debunked, yet they are continue to moving forward with this particular narrative and framing. And so the Minister of Education, again, as mentioned, Bill 33 introduced it on May 29th of this year. And so we're just going to be looking at a quick video while the Minister of Education, Paul Calandra, is introducing it in the legislature.
Introduction of government bills. I recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Various Acts in Relation to Child, Youth and Family Services, Education, and Colleges and Universities, and that it now be read for the first time.
Thank you. Mr. Calandra has moved that leave be given to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend various acts in relation to child, youth, and family services, education, and colleges and universities, and that it now be read for the first time. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried.
This is a bill entitled An Act to Amend Various Acts in Relation to Child, Youth and Family Services, Education, and College and Universities. First reading of the bill, première lecture du projet de loi.
Does the minister wish to briefly explain the bill?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill, if passed, would strengthen government oversight, accountability, and transparency in the public and post-secondary education systems and the child and youth services sector. As part of our plan to protect Ontario, the changes would also help promote the safety and well-being of children and students across the province. And Speaker, parents deserve confidence that school boards are making decisions in the best interests of their children's education, and that's why we are ensuring that every dollar invested delivers results for our students. Now, along with our partner ministries, the measures we are introducing will build on our government's ongoing work to ensure students, children, and youth benefit from the supports they need to reach ultimate achievement. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, and so again, that is the Ontario Minister of Education, Paul Calandra, on May 29th when they had introduced Bill 33. And so this is actually the transcript of what we just heard, right? And as you may have already noticed, likewise, the Minister of Education, when introducing the bill, brings up, again, this notion that the new measures within the bill, including police and policing in schools, will, again, the same narrative, create safety and well-being, that it's in the best interests of education, right? Under the guise that police are a necessary support, right? You know, like this necessary resource, calling this also a school resource officer program, right? As if it's a necessary support for students in need of reaching their ultimate achievement, right? Essentially insinuating that police and policing in schools are necessary. So moving over now to the specific wording of the legislation, specific to the various amendments that are proposed to be made to the Education Act. So looking at the specific wording, you will take note. We're going to be taking note, and it is really important as to what and how things are worded within the legislation, and simultaneously what's absent. So part of this wide-ranging legislation that we are zoning in on is that this legislation through, again, it's a government power grab, inherently embeds and provincializes the automation of policing in schools, both through police and school programs and beyond. And I want to be clear again that this is not just about police and school programs. This is not just about the SRO program, right? This legislation centralizes, again, police power by concentrating, as mentioned previously, police decision-making authority over elected school boards, right? Over elected school board trustees, which, again, these undemocratic moves ultimately would be a mandate for police and school programs, namely the SRO program, and policing in schools in other ways across the province of Ontario. And the automation of police in schools and this government essentially creating police and policing in schools, again, as mentioned, ends up becoming the notion of a fundamental cornerstone and feature of education. And this is done so through multiple ways, right? By essentially the creation of a culture of fear, right? Fear and intimidation tactics through the threat of placing school boards under supervision, right? The government would be able to choose to move ahead with placing boards under supervision to swiftly bring back police and school programs, or placing them under supervision to ensure that police and school programs and policing in schools are maintained, right? Even right now, the multiple school boards have been placed under supervision, right? And we'll get to this a bit later around the local terrains, right? That means that they can, implement police and school programs right away without even waiting for this legislation to pass, right? One of the other multiple ways is if boards were or would even be considered even be considered as thinking of moving towards the removal of a police in school program or police and policing in schools, they can automatically place them under supervision and swiftly, again, maintain police in school programs, right? Also, by making those boards who had previously removed them to retreat back and bring back police into schooling spaces, or again, under the threat of putting them under supervision to swiftly, again, bring back police and policing in schools. And so looking at each relevant part for today's teaching of Bill 33 line by line, we can see here in number 1, whereby the matter of public interest is not defined, right? So literally anything and everything could be considered a matter of public interest, meaning a board can be placed under investigation almost for any reason under the pretense of public interest. Boards can be placed under investigation, and of course, possible actions that may be taken after that investigation, right? Trustees fired, stripped of their powers, and placed under supervision, right? We know that this notion of a matter of public interest in many spaces across so-called Canada and in many other spaces across colonial borders, police and policing in schools, including police and school programs, in many instances gets taken up as a public interest issue, right? And so very much police and policing in schools will be also considered a public interest. So at number 2, as previously mentioned, as matter of public interest isn't defined in number 1, and anything and everything could be considered matter of public interest, the minister essentially becomes the lead, or let's say head school trustee, right, of the province, right? They would be equipped to give directions to the board to address the quote unquote supposed matter of public interest, right? Or simply take them over, right? These expansive powers to just place them under supervision. And the government will be able to do this whether the board has done, as mentioned, has done or not done something, or through, again, the possibility of being likely to do something or not do something. Essentially, it is predictive policing of school boards and elected school trustees to state that something that they will do or not do can affect this quote unquote dubbed matter of public interest, right? Making it, again, easier for school boards to be placed under supervision essentially for any reason. And in relation to police and schools and policing in schools, again, being considered a public interest issue under the pretense of school safety, or whether it be under the pretense of student and educator safety, community safety, school violence, relationship building with police, or along any other lines of what their narrative has been, right? So now on to, we're skipping the third line as it is not fully relevant, and we're going to the fourth. And also, as previously mentioned, in regards to how policing in schools is funded in multiple ways. This particular amendment in relation to, the minister being given power to establish policies and guidelines respecting school board expense policies, it really does have the possibility and very well can be a way to obligate school boards be the ones responsible to pay for police in school programs or policing in schools out of their school board expense, right? That is a very real possibility that could come out of number 4, right? Again, by creation of a policy and guideline on this matter. So now we're moving on to number 5. And so this is now the section directly and specifically names police in school programs, namely through the SRO program and policing in schools. And here it says, and I'll quote, "A requirement is added for boards to work with local police services to provide them with access to school premises, permit them to participate in school programs, and implement SRO programs." As I earlier mentioned, this is not just about police and school programs. And if anyone tries to tell you that this is solely about SRO programs, aka police and school programs, this is only one aspect of it. this is where it's important to distinguish again between police in school programs and police presence in schooling spaces, whether it be through school programming, school-related activities, and so forth. Again, either way, they are detrimental and have detrimental and harmful impacts on young people, right? And so we're talking about here of like, when here they're talking about access to school premises, right? Permitting police to participate and so forth, right? Again, this is the strengthening of their attempt to create police and policing as a fundamental feature of schooling spaces. And I want to take this time to provide a reminder that not all school boards have removed their police and school programs, right? Reported by Toronto Star, there are 37 boards who currently have an SRO program. The other ones don't, right? With Toronto Star having reported this, there are certain like things that we would have to learn a bit more about in regards to there may be possibly other boards that have police and school programs, but not an SR program, but a police and school program by another name, right? But that may possibly not be reported within this number because it is a distinct name from the popularly known SRO program. But again, not all school boards in the province of Ontario have an SR program or any police and school program. So it is very much about an expansion of policing across the province, right? And what about those school boards who remove their police and school program, SRO program or otherwise? For some boards, it would be essentially legislating those boards to bring back SRO programs or police and school programs. However, again, it's important to note that just because school boards removed those programs, again, it doesn't mean that police were still not being invited by individual administrators when school boards have made those decisions. Policing in schools, it includes police and school programs, but it is not just that. And so there have also been many school boards, again, that this would entail the expansion and entrenchment of policing and carceral measures in all schools, and ultimately, again, effectively mandating it through legislation across the province. And so trying to close off any loopholes, this government, as we can see here in number 7, related regulation making powers are included, right? So closing off any loopholes by essentially giving themselves regulation making powers in relation to any of these amendments, right? And then these here what you're seeing is like the particular pieces where it's just kind of like put more into point form as to what we had seen previously. And so now we're going to be looking at the changing landscape and terrains for organizing and the impact that Bill 33 in fact has already changed the landscape. And so again, solely with the introduction of Bill 33, right? This legislation, it's a proposed legislation. It's only been introduced. It hasn't been legislated. But despite it not even being legislated at this time, it has fundamentally change the terrains in local spaces for organizing and advocacy across the province. And this very much looks differently based on where you are located in and across Ontario, right? Keeping in mind, again, we do have a majority Ford government, and this legislation with a high probability will be going through. But in regards to school boards, one of the things that is on our radar are how, again, those trustees who have been over the years attempting to either bring back or expand policing in schools, whether under a police and school program or otherwise, based on where they are locally situated, have been and have the possibility to also utilize Bill 33 even prior to it is legislated as a rationalization to open up the issue, open up this matter once again. And for instance, right, recently we saw this at the prior to them being placed under supervision, we saw this at their last meetings at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, right? Due to the proposed legislation, Bill 33, brought forward by the Minister of Education that seeks to mandate police and policing in schools. Trustee Blackburn recently on June 3rd this past month, already had put forward a motion yet again, because they've been trying this a lot of times, and our Ottawa-based partners, the Silu Collective, has continuously been pushing back. But Trustee Blackburn has put forward a motion in relation to police in schools, right? And the redundancy of this motion was struck out due to the supposed quote unquote evolving nature of what the government has proposed, right? And even though within the motion, it wasn't necessarily, saying bring back an SRO program, the particular way it was worded essentially brings a pathway to have expanded policing in schools, right? The motion was put to a vote recently on June 23rd, and it passed with a majority of 7 trustees voting in favor and 4 opposed. And the motion involved and resolved one of the pieces, that the Director of Education continued to engage in discussions with the OPS to establish standards of practice that allow for police support to schools, respecting the safety and security of the board, students, and staff, right? So it's very much a sneaky way. And despite Bill 33, again, only having been introduced, there may be additional pressures on local organizing, including campaigns to place pressure even prior to it being legislated. Right. As for school boards that are under supervision, even those who have been recently placed under supervision, right? Literally, the supervisor can automate bringing back a police in school program, bringing back police and policing in schools, right? Without it, again, Bill 33 having to be legislated. But again, for the school boards that are under supervision, but as well as it goes to every other school board locally, due to how easy, again, it will be to place boards under supervision, it is increasingly important to get involved in committees, to get involved particularly in parent involvement committees, as well as placing pressure on the supervisor that's appointed and on senior staff for preemptive policies and procedures that would mitigate and or reduce harm prior to legislation going through. Again, we already know that Ford has a majority government, and the highest probability as that this bill 33 will be pushed through, right? And so for those who still have elected trustees in power, the prioritization of inside-outside relationship building is so fundamental, and organizing, as well as ongoing pressure on trustees, as well for preemptive policies and procedures that, again, would also mitigate and or reduce harm prior to legislation going through, and what strategies may be viable for that school board. And then an example of policies and procedures that would work to mitigate and reduce harm are emergency preparedness action plans in support of students who are undocumented and those who have precarious immigration status. For instance, in relation to if Canada Border Services Agency is seeking to enter schooling spaces, right? Schools would at least have an action plan to not permit their entry. Or if when police may be granted extended powers in the future as a Canadian Border Service agent, right? Reminder, it is important that we don't see this Bill 33 isolated from everything else that is happening, right? This bill intersects with many bills, right? Including legislation, including the federal bill C2, the so-called Strong Borders Act, right? An initiative by the federal government that threatens human rights, refugee and migrant rights. And within the bill, it gives mass deportation powers, right? So the immigration minister gains authority to cancel permits for entire groups without due process, including revoking permanent residency applications and so forth, right? And so the possibility of then, when having police and policing in schools and then possibly having extended powers, or the collusion with the immigration policing system, starkly impacts undocumented and precarious immigration status students, right? Another example of something that can be pushed for preemptively is pushing for opt-in forms in relation to young people's contact with police, right? Meanwhile, opt-out forms that certain schools may already actually have, it places the onus and labor on those who are most negatively impacted, right? Having an opt-in option takes not only the burden away from those adversely impacted, but as well as the creation of barriers, right? We want to create barriers between police contact with young people. So those are just some examples. And in regards to municipalities, because I know that Alexis Dawson is going to be speaking also to the changing landscape of organizing and advocacy at the trustee level, I'll switch over now in regards to municipalities. And so, as so many of us already know, the police budget, across so-called Canada, across so-called Ontario, has and continues to increase. This will be yet again another reason for police to ask for further increased police budgets from council members to implement police and schooling spaces and police and school programs, right? And if folks are not already organizing around this matter, join folks locally who are already in your local spaces who may be already organizing around this. And if not, if no one is, folks can organize and mobilize around this issue for budget time, right? This is also not surprising, as recently in another Toronto Star article, for instance, a spokesperson for the Toronto Police Service, Stephanie Sayer, was quoted, and I quote, "We do not currently have SROs in schools, and any change to that status would require a comprehensive review of needs and resources as part of our regular annual budget discussions," right? So police are already telling us that they're going to be asking for more money, right? And that was stated in a statement, right? And so what we're seeing here is also that same statement. They also mention, and I quote again, "That said, meaningful youth engagement continues, and we remain committed to working collaboratively with our city and provincial partners to support school safety in Toronto. Many of our divisional and neighborhood community officers maintain strong relationships with schools across the city." So this is just a Toronto example. However, this is very much across the province, right? This is not just a Toronto issue. This is just an example. I'm showing how they are going to be seeking to increase police budgets. And again, police and policing in schools is already happening, even if they don't have a police and school program, whether it's the SRO program or otherwise. And again, remember, you are the experts of your local terrains and conditions. And so before we head over to unpack the provincial landscape, I am going to now be turning it over to Alexis Dawson, who I had introduced previously, is a community member and who was a democratically elected Ontario-based school board trustee, and whose board has been recently placed under supervision and trustees stripped of their powers. She will be introducing herself and giving a rundown of including but not limited to what is a trustee, what a trustee does, the primary responsibilities of a trustee, and how the role has changed based on the proposed legislation, including key additional changes to Bill 33. They will also be speaking to what being stripped of trustees' powers looks like and how that changes the approach to organizing and advocacy, and as well what it looks like for those who still have trustees in power across Ontario, and what that means for, again, local folks' advocacy with this introduced and pending legislation of Bill 33. So I'll pass it over to Alexis Dawson now. I'm just gonna highlight you and then.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for the amazing and informative presentation so far. I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides to present. Okay. So first of all, who am I? My name's Alexis Dawson, and first and foremost, I'm a mom. I have two kids in Toronto District School Board, And I've been a very active and involved parent since my son started JK 10 years ago. I started my activism on our school council, the parent council, and was actually the school council chair for several years, leading initiatives like a school grounds improvement initiative, equity initiatives within the school, and then just sort of grew my role as a volunteer in the community, helping others navigate the school system. And that was really what brought me to the board level advocacy, is that I was seeing, many disparities in communities with respect to equitable access to education, and particularly in Black communities and those with special education needs. So I decided to run in the municipal election in 2022, and I did win the seat of Ward 9, which is 2 city council wards in Toronto. It's quite large, Davenport and Spadina and Fort York. So if you know Toronto at all, that ward extends from Eglinton to Kiel, all the way south to the island and back up to the distillery. So it's quite a huge area, and it has been my pleasure to serve the community. So what does a trustee actually do? We have a few primary responsibilities. So we are locally elected to represent the public, and we are the community's advocate for public education. So, we are the people that you go to when your issue at the school board is, full blown. And so it is our job to help you navigate that system in order to get the best access that you can to your educational supports. We make decisions that don't just benefit our immediate communities, but we have to take into consideration the board's entire jurisdiction when we're making decisions at the board level. We are responsible for establishing policy direction of the board, and that would include the policing in schools policy. And also, we are responsible for the board's multi-year strategic plan. So I would say community support, policy or governance, our multi-year strategic plan, and the school board budget. Those would be the primary responsibilities of a trustee. We are accountable to our electorate and to the province. So we are governed by the Education Act. Trustee is a part-time role. A lot of people are surprised to hear that. We receive an honorarium. In the Toronto District School Board, it's $25,000 a year, and other school boards would be much less than that based on their size. At the Toronto District School Board, we have approximately 240,000 students, 40,000 staff, and as well, there are adult learners that aren't included in those K-12 numbers. So we are the largest school board in Canada and the 6th largest in North America, with 22 trustees representing 22 wards. So trustees are required to attend committee meetings and board meetings. Committee meetings are where many of the decisions are made. Often trustees get more speaking time to ask staff questions during committee meetings, and then the committee will vote and make recommendations to the full board for their final approval. It is at the committee stage that the public can make what are called delegations. So making a delegation is when you register to speak to trustees for a short period of time. It's different by school board. At the TDSB, it is either 3 or 5 minutes, depending the number of delegations. And you get to speak to trustees on a topic that is pertinent to their committee's mandate or a topic that is on the agenda for that evening. So making a delegation is a really, really critical way that you can state your case around policing in schools to the school board and have the full attention of trustees. Everything school boards do are in public. So at the TDSB, we do broadcast our meetings on YouTube. That is not the case for many of the boards. Most boards have, their doors open for the public to come in person, but wouldn't necessarily have their meetings broadcast. So in addition to being a part of committees, trustees can also participate on ad hoc steering committees, external committees and boards. So for instance, I'm on the Canadian National Exhibition Association and as well the Scadding-Court Community Centre Board of Directors, which is in my community. And we also can volunteer for community advisory committees, and those are specific to TDSB. But really, I think from an advocacy perspective, you would want to be reading the board agendas, keeping up with the minutes, attending any meetings that your trustees are holding, reaching out to your trustees by email. And when you reach out to your trustee by email, I have one big suggestion, and that is for you to make your email as unique and personal as possible. You are more likely to get a response that way, and your email is more likely to be read. As trustees, like anybody in office, we receive hundreds of emails that are campaign letters, form letters, where the person has simply signed their first and last name or their address, and it gets automatically sent to us. Those are fine. They do serve a purpose. They serve the purpose of flooding our inboxes and telling us there's an issue, but it is very much appreciated when we receive very passionate, individual, personal emails from constituents, and would be more likely to reply in that case. So what does provincial supervision mean for trustees? There are currently 4 boards under provincial supervision. The TDSB and other boards' supervisions were preceded by financial investigations. Although the financial investigation at the Toronto District School Board revealed no financial mismanagement, because of our multi-year structural deficit, we were put under supervision. And that happened on Friday, June 27th at 11 a.m. So as of Friday, June 27th at 11 a.m., trustees were stripped of their honorarium, as well as the ability to do many things. So we are not allowed to have any of our regular board or committee meetings. We are not allowed to make any governance decisions. We have no access to school board resources. So meaning we can't use our email, we can't use our email lists for our newsletters. We can't use school board property to hold meetings. We cannot access schools for the purposes of meeting with principals and things like that. We cannot advocate effectively on behalf of families because we don't have access to the staff or resources to do that effectively. But we can still act in the capacity of community member. And that is why I am here today. I am here as a community member who is very passionate about abolishing policing in schools. This is work and other work that I've been engaged with from an advocacy perspective long before being, winning an election. It was what drove me to run. So it is not possible to strip me of my title of mom and community member. I will always be here. And I would hope the same for my peers. as trustees. We all did get into this because, it's not for the money, clearly. It's for the advancement of our and well-being of our children. So while we are unable to use board resources to hold meetings, to respond to emails, we are still figuring out, or I am figuring out how to position myself still as a community leader that can help to advance this cause in particular. The supervisor does make all governance decisions, and with the implementation of Bill 33, there will be, as Andrea mentioned, the ability for a provincial takeover or supervision due to any matter of public interest. So it would no longer just be the few things that are set out in the Education Act currently. It would be all encompassing. So some of the key changes, so we've talked about police SRO programs. Also, the province will now have full control over school naming and renaming. So one of the motions that the TDSB passed was to rename 3 schools, including one of my schools, which is Ryerson Community School. That is now on hold because the province would like to control that initiative. It also gives the province powers to direct the sale of school property. They can direct that sale be made to a specific developer, for instance, or they can put it on the open market. So really, they can make this a real estate grab. As I mentioned, supervision due to any matter of public interest. Another key point is that they have removed the necessity for consultation with the Ontario Public School Boards Association, which is the member organization for all 72 public English boards across the province. And, we've seen some very troubling changes take place at Thames Valley District School Board that has been under supervision from the start of the time that the TDSB went under investigation. So they were put under supervision immediately. Investigation was bypassed in their case, and there have been swooping changes made to primarily their equity and human rights departments that have both been gutted. So that is a real fear of mine. And I think that, as we consider equity and human rights, that certainly the preservation of those things ties into our desire to not have policing in schools. So I did just want to talk very briefly about the structural deficit at the TDSB because, this game is very political. And when school boards are positioned as having, financial mismanagement or structural deficits that are within their control, these are the 3 primary criteria as to why the Toronto District School Board has been unable to balance our budget. We have 70 million in depleted reserves that the province allowed us to use for particular purposes and have not been reimbursed. We were directed to use 30 million to support pandemic recovery, and that included additional mental health supports in the form of child and youth workers, community support workers, school-based safety monitors, and that funding was removed entirely, and we were not reimbursed for the funding that we spent during the pandemic. And so with the removal of that funding, the TDSB made the decision to continue to fund those initiatives with money that we don't have. And so the TDSB continues to go into debt because of, continuing to fund those very important positions that are critical to the well-being and mental health of the children in our schools. And lastly, the government does not fund statutory benefits for staff. So that would be CPP, EI, and the like. So even though those terms are centrally negotiated with the province and the unions, the province does not reimburse school boards for those things. So really, this is somewhat of a calculated move on the part of the province. They know what they are doing here. And I think it's up to us to continue to push back. I will do that in, however I can, in whatever capacity I can. But I do encourage people to reach out to their trustee, even if the board is under supervision. We do not have access to our regular emails. So you will have to find your trustee through social media, through some other channel, through their own website. These rules are new to us as of last Friday, and we weren't expecting to lose everything. So it's going to take a little bit of time to determine how we are, remain public facing and accessible to the public. But if you do have a trustee or have a school board that is not under supervision, once again, want to reiterate that the best ways to advocate would be writing to your trustee, making a delegation, and organizing together with families from the same school board to get that message amplified. So that's it for me. This is my personal email, so please do feel free to reach out to me anytime. I am in contact with trustees across the province, so if you do have a question about your local board, I'm very happy to put you into contact with somebody that might be able to help you navigate that. So please do reach out to me and stay tuned through Andrea on any future events that I might be involved in. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexis. Just going to be sharing my screen again, then we're going to be getting right into upcoming back to school initiatives. One moment. Thank you so much, Alexis, for sharing on how, again, there are immediate changes to the landscape and terrains for advocacy and organizing. And here we also know that provincially, there may be a possibility for the Ministry of Solicitor General in regards to funding to fully fund police in schools through a police in school program specific grant, or policing in schools expansion of policing specific grant, right? With this said, Bill 33 is absolutely, again, no surprise. We've been raising alarms from before, and so are in a position that is fundamentally a bit more prepared than would have been if not, right? But based on both the national, provincial landscape analysis on what has been happening in other spaces, we knew that certain things, especially as a community-based organization that's primarily grassroots, that priorities would shift, and those shifts from previously now remain the same in our priorities as well. So as a reminder, again, years ago, a provincial campaign for policing free schools Ontario was deemed necessary. We had already looked at this previously, have also input the trends here that you can see. But also, one of the things that's important, this is an intergenerational struggle. And there is an ongoing need for electoral political organizing, right? That's further affirmed by the existence of Bill 33. And so in regards to electoral politics, at Policing Free Schools, we do see it as an opportunity and one of the multiple ways to further community organizing, to build and deepen connections, to raise awareness, to defend and keep wins and create new wins, to reduce harm, change material conditions, exercise agency, and dream up, right? Elections are an opportunity to choose the electoral political landscape and terrains in which we will continue the struggle, right? Recognizing that community organizing and building, along with holding elected officials to account, regardless of which political party comes into power, does continue after election day, right? And so I do want to be fully transparent. Prior to saying this, I was previously both on Ontario New Democratic Party and a federal NDP candidate, both provincially and federally. So I just want to keep that transparent, as I do mention that the viable government in Ontario that does support funding, properly funding, supporting, and resourcing schools and not police and policing in schools, and actually has a policy paper stance, is the Ontario New Democratic Party. And is the party that has consistently backed us up and supported, again, the push for funding our schools, not policing in schools. And again, electoral political organizing is one of the multiple ways to further organizing. As for our provincial campaign priorities, right, it is about centering on resistance and pushing back. It's about political education, right, building up that awareness, capacity building. It's about supporting care. It's about centering, mitigating, and reducing harm, right? It's about the co-creation of respite spaces away from police and policing. And so the back to school initiatives, calls to action, how to support and get involved with the provincial campaign for policing free schools Ontario. There are many ways that folks can support us and get involved. And these are just some of the multiple ways that you can do so, right? So for our back to school initiatives, we are going to be having political education teach-ins as well as trainings. Right now, they are being organized for the month of August. There is going to be a larger in-depth of police and policing in schools, the Ontario Provincial Landscape and Terrains, connected to the additional foundation and fundamentals of policing free schools through the organizer landscape. So folks who want to organize, whether it be formally with policing free schools or just as, when speaking with community members, family members, and so forth, right? One of those teach-ins is also going to be an Ontario-based Know Your Rights. We are partnering with Ontario-based Community Justice Collective, and it's really going to be focusing on the risks, on the considerations and rights, particularly of young people when organizing against police and policing in schools, right? And what that means with this particular bill. For trainings, we are going to have an assault at #AssaultAtCanada training. We have been trained by our US partners, the Advancement Project and the Alliance for Educational Justice. And basically their training has been, for lack of a better term, quote unquote, Canadianized. We have had our national partners, the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, and their support through their lawyers, Canadianizing the legal information and those aspects. And so an assault at, what it is when acts of police violence and police brutality happen against students by police and policing in school program officers, school police, other police officers that are not necessarily your school-based ones, security guards, and so forth, right? As part of the schooling policing infrastructure. What we are looking to do is training up community members. It is going to be a completely free training. It's for anyone who is interested in taking this training. And the whole notion is to build up capacity so that people are able to provide locally rapid response support when an assault act happens, right? There's going to be a creation of an assault act reporting tool where also for historical police violence and police brutality can be recorded, right? There is going to be a creation of those who have been trained, who do take the training as part of a national community of care assault at rapid response network. So when police brutality and police violence do happen within schooling spaces, there is an alert that goes out so that young people and their family are able to be supported if folks within the local space that are trained up have capacity to do so. We also have a policing free spaces teach-in and a pledge coming up. So just as equitable access to schooling and educational spaces is necessary, and police presence impedes that access, just as same equitable access to community space and programming is essential, and the presence of police in community spaces, police in community programming, and particularly police and community youth programming impedes this access. People and organizations have a responsibility to engage in ongoing deep unlearnings and relearnings around this issue, adopt safeguarding practices, and move towards larger transformative change. And we know that young people are policed in schools, they're policed on the bus, they're policed in malls, they're policed in the streets, in community spaces, grassroots spaces even, right? And so young people need respite spaces away from policing. And a policy response that policing free schools recognizes as a practice that mitigates and reduces harm, reduces barriers for access to community space and programming, and as an entry point into a continuum of transformative changes, it is actually Food Share Toronto's policy for police engagement. The policy was intentionally designed to protect team members, workers, community members, including community programming participants, and the wider community from police and carceral violence as much as possible. And so that's it's a policy, in place for decision-making in relation to engagements with police and ensuring what I call now policing free spaces, right? And so the pledges that are going to be for everyone and anyone to place pressure on their community organizations, on nonprofits that are within their local spaces. The pledges have been amended from the original version, and there will be multiple iterations, including for nonprofits, charities, associations, grassroots artists, creatives, and even funders, asking funders to stop funding any organization that works with and or collaborates with police. And so those are some of our teach-ins, trainings, and pledges coming up. We're also going to have a ZAP, a phone and email petition ZAP, coming in August. As for current calls to action, we already have on our website at policingfreeschools.ca, y'all can sign the online petition, y'all can send an email, and y'all can make a call using our click to call tool. Those are current calls to action. These are digital and remote actions at this time. We have additional upcoming calls to action. Of course, we have additional remote calls to action, such as sharing your story, right? We have been actually compiling stories from across the country, but we want folks to share their story. We want to emphasize that, of course, a remote calls to actions when the reporting tool is out to report an assault act, whether it's historical or current, in that moment, so that young people, families, and communities can get support. Of course, we're going to be asking for endorsements for the provincial campaign, for the demands that were petitioned to the government from last year, and much more. In regards to in-person calls to action, we are going to have upcoming calls to action for mainstreaming, collecting paper petition signatures. We already have confirmed with NDP, Ontario New Democratic Party MPP Wong Tam's office in regards to them. They will be tabling the paper petition with new signatures once the legislature comes back, and possibly additional NDP MPPs that we are looking to confirm. We are going to have calls to action to fill up the legislature gallery when those petitions are being tabled, and we are organizing as well with partners a provincial campaign rally and much more. For folks, another way to get involved is join the Provincial Campaign for Policing Free Schools Ontario. The Provincial Campaign, again, is convened and led by Policing Free Schools and includes people, organizers, and organizations from across the province of Ontario. And the Provincial Campaign for Policing Free Schools Ontario is a formation of, again, folks that are fighting for police-free schools as a first and necessary step towards policing free schools by uprooting the multiple ways that policing and carcerality show up in educational spaces beyond police presence. And alongside our partners, what this space really is a communal space where we remain and struggle alongside each other towards transformative spaces, a space where we can further elevate, support, and connect even more campaigns and policing free school organizers and collectives across what we currently call Ontario. And really about being grounded in a collective framework, deepening our solidarity work through organizational exchanges, strategizing, and actionizing as we ultimately move towards a policing free schools Ontario collectively. Another way that folks can support is, again, Policing Free Schools is a community-based organization that is primarily grassroots. Any amount helps to continue this work, so folks can donate. We have a donate button on our website, and donations are able to be sent via e-transfer to our email, connect@policingfreeschools.ca. Password we will win, and every dollar counts. And make sure, if you haven't already, check out our website. We have many resources that folks can share, including a Know Your Rights Police in Schools pocketbook that is usable across the country, that was created by our BC-based British Columbia Civil Liberties Association partners, and many other resources that are found on our website, policingfreeschools.ca. And of course, please stay informed. If anything comes out of this, join our mailing list. You'll be the ones to be updated first on calls for solidarity, calls to action, emergency actions, teach-ins, and so forth. You can join our mailing list by also just visiting our website, policingfreeschools.ca. Connect with us, contact us at our email, follow us on our socials. We have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. All of our teach-ins that get recorded get uploaded there. Follow us and subscribe. And prior to moving forward to the community knowledge exchange, I want us ground us in hope, right? I want to ground us that this is an ongoing struggle, right? That this is an ongoing struggle. This is an intergenerational struggle. And I quote, and I want to quote Angela Davis. And Angela Davis says, "What we manage to do each time we win a victory is not so much to secure change once and for all, but rather to create new terrains for struggle." I've come to the conclusion that our work as activists is always to prepare the next generation, to create new terrain so that those who come after us will have a better opportunity to get up and engage in even more radical struggles. And I think we're seeing this now. So I want us to be leaving with the end of the teach-in portion prior to the community knowledge exchange with hope. And so thank you all for coming, and for folks who are able to stay for the community knowledge exchange. We are going to stop the recording so that folks are able to engage deeply, are able to ask questions, and are able to speak out freely. And thank you again for all those for attending the Ontario Provincial Digital Teach-In, mandating police and policing in schools through Bill 33, Provincial Landscape and Terrains. So now I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll go into the province-wide community knowledge exchange.